My grandfather slammed his fist on the dining table so hard the champagne flutes jumped. Crystal clinked against crystal, sounding like tiny screams. The countdown clock on the wall still blinked midnight, but no one was celebrating anymore. Confetti lay scattered across the white tablecloth like evidence at a crime scene. "Why?" he roared, pointing at a man I had never seen before. "Is a stranger running the multi-million-dollar company I left you?" Every face at the table turned toward me. My mother's fork froze halfway to her mouth, a piece of roasted duck still stuck on the silver tines. My father's smile faded mid-laugh, his face turning from cheerful to stone in a second. My brother Logan stopped chewing, his mouth hanging open like he forgot how to close it. My throat tightened. Heat rushed to my face and spread down my neck like fire. "What are you talking about?" I whispered, my voice cracking. "I don't even have $1 to my name." The room went completely silent. You could hear the hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen. You could hear a watch ticking. You could hear my heart pounding against my ribs like it was trying to break free. My parents' perfect smiles began to crack. My brother's hand shook as he set down his crystal glass. Then the front door opened, and the police walked in. 2 officers stepped inside, taking off their hats and showing badges clipped to their belts. They were not smiling. They did not apologize for interrupting our family celebration. They scanned the room with trained eyes, like they already knew who they were looking for and what they expected to find. My mother's hand shook so badly, her napkin slipped from her lap and floated to the floor like a white flag of surrender. My father stood up too fast, his chair scraping back with a sharp screech that made everyone flinch. The sound echoed in the sudden silence. My brother Logan wouldn't look at me. He stared down at his plate, like it held answers he was too afraid to say out loud. I remember thinking with strange clarity, this is it. Whatever they've been hiding, whatever they've been doing behind my back all these years, it's finally here. It's finally blowing up in their perfect faces, and there's nowhere left to run. One officer, the taller one, with gray at his temples and lines around kind eyes, spoke in a calm, professional voice that somehow made everything more frightening. "Is this the Hawthorne residence?" My grandfather straightened in his chair at the head of the table. His face was calm. Too calm. Like he had been waiting for this exact moment for months, maybe years. "You're right on time," he said simply. Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. The stranger by the window, the man my grandfather had pointed at, stood perfectly still, his hands in his pockets, watching everything unfold. Before anyone could explain, before the officers could say another word or make their reason for being there clear, my father turned on me with the speed of a cornered animal. "Tell them you don't know anything," he hissed, his voice low and urgent but loud enough for everyone to hear. "You've embarrassed us enough already, Caleb." Enough. That word hung in the air like poison gas, spreading through the room and choking anyone who breathed it in. Like this was just another one of my endless failures. Like I was the problem child who couldn't stop causing scenes. Like I had somehow planned this whole nightmare just to make them look bad in front of everyone. The officer looked confused, his eyes moving between my father's red face and my pale one, trying to understand the family drama unfolding in front of him. The stranger by the window didn't blink. He just watched with the calm patience of someone who already knew how this story ended because he had read the script. That's when my grandfather spoke quietly, his voice cutting through the tension like a knife through silk. "Sit down, all of you, now." My father hesitated. For a moment I thought he might argue, might try to take control or prove he was still in charge. But something in Grandpa's tone, something cold, final, and unmovable, made him obey. He sat. My mother sat, smoothing her dress with shaking hands. Logan sat, his face pale as milk. And that's when I realized something terrifying. My grandfather had planned this. Every single second of it. My name is Caleb Whitmore. In my family, I was always an afterthought. The spare child. The one they tolerated at holidays but never truly celebrated, never truly saw. Before I go on, let me know you're here. Drop a listening in the comments or tell me where you're watching from. It still amazes me how far one story can travel. And if you like stories like this, hit subscribe so you don't miss the next one. My older brother Logan was the opposite of me. He was the golden child, the heir, the favorite son, the athlete with scholarship offers from 3 universities, the one with the beautiful girlfriend from a respectable family with old money and older traditions, the one whose mistakes were called learning experiences and whose failures were met with hugs and encouragement. Mine were character flaws that proved I'd never amount to anything. At every holiday, every dinner, every family toast and celebration, I was invisible unless something went wrong. Then suddenly I was the center of attention, the disappointment, the reason things weren't picture perfect for the annual Christmas card. I worked 2 jobs to pay rent on a studio apartment with peeling paint, a leaky faucet, and a radiator that only worked half the time, leaving me freezing through winter nights. I clipped grocery coupons like my life depended on it, while Logan drove a brand new SUV with leather seats and talked loudly at family gatherings about managing family assets and investment strategies. They told everyone at church, at the country club, at neighborhood barbecues that Grandpa didn't trust me with money. They told me directly, repeatedly, that the family company was gone, sold off years ago to cover debts I never saw invoices for. I believed them completely. And tonight, sitting at that table with police officers standing in the doorway and my family's masks cracking, I realized that was their first and biggest mistake. The man my grandfather had pointed at finally spoke, breaking the heavy silence. His voice was calm, educated, controlled like a professor addressing a lecture hall. "My name is Miles Arden," he said, pulling a crisp business card from his jacket pocket and placing it on the table where everyone could see. "I'm currently listed as the acting director of Whitmore Industrial Holdings." My father went pale. Actually pale, like someone had physically drained the blood from his face with a syringe. I stared at the business card without touching it. I had never heard that name in my entire life. Never signed a single document with it printed anywhere. Never authorized anything related to any company. Miles added, looking directly at me with steady brown eyes, "At least, that's what the official paperwork says. Corporate documents, tax filings, board resolutions." My grandfather smiled for the first time that night. It wasn't a warm smile or the gentle expression I remembered from childhood birthday parties when he'd sneak me extra cake. It was cold, satisfied, dangerous, like a chess player who just said checkmate. "Show them," Grandpa said quietly. Miles reached into his expensive leather briefcase and pulled out a thick manila folder, the kind lawyers use for important cases. He placed it on the table, right in the center where everyone could see, and opened it slowly. My mother made a small choking sound, pressing her napkin against her mouth. Logan's jaw tightened so hard I could see the muscle jumping beneath his skin. And I sat there frozen, watching my family fall apart without understanding why or what any of this meant for me. Let me tell you what my life actually looked like while my family lived in comfort and luxury. I worked mornings at a shipping warehouse on the industrial side of town, loading trucks before dawn broke, my breath visible in the freezing air. I worked evenings at a grocery store 3 blocks from my apartment, stocking shelves until closing time at 11, then walking home through empty streets. I came home every night smelling like cardboard and industrial cleaner, too exhausted to cook anything substantial, eating cereal or ramen for dinner while standing at my kitchen counter. My apartment had one small window that looked out at a brick wall covered in graffiti. My couch was from a thrift store, sagging in the middle with springs that poked through if you sat wrong. My clothes were hand-me-downs from donation bins or clearance rack finds from discount stores. Meanwhile, Logan drove a new SUV that cost more than I made in 2 years. My parents renovated their kitchen with imported marble countertops and professional-grade appliances. They took vacations to places I'd only seen in travel magazines at the dentist's office. They told anyone who asked about me, that Grandpa didn't trust me with money, that I was irresponsible with finances, that the family company had been sold years ago to cover debts from bad investments. They said it so often with such confidence and conviction that I completely stopped questioning the story. I believed them entirely. I believed I was the failure they said I was, the disappointment, the one who couldn't get his life together no matter how hard he tried. That belief kept me quiet, kept me small, kept me from asking questions that might have uncovered the truth years earlier. People thought my grandfather favored Logan because he spent more time with him at family events. Because Logan visited the old man more often, called more frequently, showed up to birthdays and holidays with expensive gifts and loud stories about his successes. But the truth was completely different, and I was only beginning to understand it now. Grandpa watched quietly from his chair in the corner. He noticed things other people missed, things people thought he was too old to see or understand. He noticed who interrupted who at dinner conversations, who answered questions that were clearly meant for someone else, who signed papers too quickly without reading them properly, who made decisions about family business without consulting the person who supposedly owned it. He noticed who assumed the old man was already gone, already irrelevant, already too senile to matter, before he was even buried. My grandfather was 83 years old. His hands shook sometimes when he held his coffee cup. His hearing wasn't perfect anymore. People treated him like he was fading, like his mind was slipping into that fog that takes old people. They were catastrophically wrong. His mind was sharp as broken glass, cutting through lies and seeing truth. And he'd been collecting evidence for years, documenting everything, building a case, brick by careful brick. He let them steal because he wanted to see how far they'd go, how bold they'd become in their theft, how thoroughly they'd betray the family name and everything it stood for. And now, at this New Year's dinner with police standing in the doorway, he was finally ready to show everyone exactly what he'd found. One officer, the shorter one with kind eyes and a patient expression, asked directly, "Mr. Whitmore, did you personally authorize a transfer of company control last March?" My father opened his mouth to answer, his face flushing red with anger mixed with barely controlled panic. But Grandpa raised one finger, just one trembling finger, and my father's mouth snapped shut like a trap. The officer looked at me instead, waiting for my answer. "Sir, did you authorize any transfer of company control or sign any documents related to Whitmore Industrial Holdings?" Everyone stared at me, waiting, judging, probably expecting me to stumble over my words like I always did under pressure. "No," I said. My voice was surprisingly steady, which shocked me almost as much as what was happening. I didn't even know there was anything to transfer. I was told the company was sold years ago. Logan's jaw tightened visibly. His hands balled into fists under the table where he thought no one could see. "That's impossible," my father said quickly, desperately. "Caleb signed all the documents. We have his signature on file, legal signatures, witnessed and notarized." "Do you?" the officer asked calmly. Miles opened the manila folder with deliberate slowness. Inside were photocopies of signatures, dozens of them. My name written over and over on different documents, different dates. But the handwriting wasn't quite right. The loops were too big and exaggerated. The slant was wrong, tilting the opposite direction from my natural hand. "That's not my signature," I said quietly, leaning forward to look closer. My mother's face crumpled like wet paper. My father looked like he might actually be physically sick. And Logan wouldn't look at anyone, staring at his hands like they belonged to someone else. My grandfather had done something absolutely brilliant, something I was only beginning to fully understand and appreciate as the pieces fell into place. He let them steal it all. He let Logan parade around town like a young prince, making business decisions at the country club, signing contracts with suppliers, acting like he owned everything and had earned it through his own merit. He let my parents move money through trusts and proxy companies, hiding transactions in layers of paperwork, covering their tracks with the arrogance of people who thought they were smarter than everyone else. He let them believe I was too weak, too poor, too beaten down by life to matter anymore, too stupid to figure out what was happening right under my nose, all while documenting absolutely everything they did. Every forged signature saved as evidence, every fake authorization photographed and filed, every dollar moved without proper permission tracked and recorded. He had bank statements going back 18 months, legal documents with timestamps, recorded phone calls saved on digital files, email chains printed and organized, text messages screenshot and archived. He built a case so airtight that even the most expensive lawyer in the state couldn't find a crack in it. And he waited with the patience of someone who'd lived through wars and depressions and knew that justice, real justice, requires perfect timing. He waited for the perfect moment when they felt safest, when they were celebrating their success, when they thought they'd gotten away with everything and I'd never be smart enough to figure it out. Then he brought the hammer down with devastating force, right here, right now, in front of everyone who mattered. At New Year's dinner, when families are supposed to come together, Miles pulled out a small digital recorder from his briefcase and placed it carefully on the table next to the folder. It looked ordinary, almost cheap, harmless, but my mother gasped audibly when she saw it, recognizing immediately what it meant. "May I play this?" Miles asked, looking at the officers respectfully. They both nodded, moving closer to hear clearly. Miles pressed play with a quiet click. My father's voice filled the formal dining room, tinny but unmistakably clear, from a recording made months earlier in what sounded like his home office. "Caleb doesn't need to know anything about this. He wouldn't understand the complexities anyway. Just make sure the signature looks clean and professional. Nobody's going to check it carefully. Nobody cares about him." Then my mother's voice, higher and worried. "Are you absolutely sure this is legal? What if someone questions it?" My father again dismissive. "It's completely fine. He signed power of attorney years ago when he was 18. We're just exercising our parental rights to manage his affairs. It's perfectly legal. Except I never signed power of attorney. Not when I was 18. Not ever." Logan's voice came next, younger and uncertain. But what if he somehow finds out what we're doing? My father actually laughed on the recording, a cruel, confident laugh that made my stomach turn. He won't find out, and even if he somehow does, who's going to believe him? He can barely pay his rent on time. He has no credibility. I felt something snap behind my ribs, something cold and final and irreversible. I looked at my parents across the table, at Logan sitting beside them. None of them would meet my eyes now. The officers weren't casual anymore, weren't treating this like a family misunderstanding they could mediate and walk away from. They stood straighter, more alert. Their hands moved subtly toward their belts where handcuffs hung in leather pouches. They asked sharper questions now, voices harder. They wrote things down in small notebooks with careful precision, documenting everything for reports that would be filed. Logan tried desperately to joke, his voice too loud and forced, cracking at the edges. "This is completely ridiculous. It's just a family misunderstanding, officers. We can sort this out privately." Nobody laughed. Nobody even smiled. My grandfather looked at me then, really looked at me with full attention for the first time all evening. His eyes were tired, red-rimmed from age and emotion, but perfectly clear and focused. "I left the company to you," he said quietly, his voice carrying despite its softness, "because you're the only one who wouldn't rush to sell it for quick cash. The only one who understands what it means to actually build something with your own hands, instead of just spending what someone else built before you." I swallowed hard, my throat feeling impossibly tight. "I didn't know any of this existed." "I know you didn't," he said gently. "That's exactly why you were the right choice. The only choice." Logan made a sound then, something between a bitter laugh and a choked sob, his composure finally cracking completely. My father's face was purple now, veins standing out on his forehead. My mother was crying silently, mascara running down her cheeks in black streams that ruined her perfect makeup. And I sat there trying to process that everything I'd believed about my entire life, about who I was and what I was worth, was a complete and total lie. Logan finally exploded with all the pent-up emotion he'd been holding back. He slammed his hand down on the table hard enough to make the silverware jump and clatter. "This is absolutely ridiculous. He's always been jealous of me, always wanted everything I had. This is just pathetic revenge because he could never measure up." "Revenge for what exactly?" Grandpa asked with infuriating calmness. "For succeeding in life? For being loved by your parents? For having advantages?" "Yes, for all of it." "Then explain your gambling debt to everyone here." Logan froze completely, his face going from flushed red to corpse white in seconds flat. "What gambling debt?" my mother asked, her voice shaking with new fear. Grandpa pulled out another paper from a different folder, reading it with glasses perched on his nose. "Logan currently owes $87,000 in gambling debts to 3 different casinos. Money he borrowed against company assets that he doesn't legally own and never did." The room went completely silent except for the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway. "That's not—" Logan started desperately. "The casinos have detailed records," Grandpa interrupted calmly. "Timestamps, video surveillance, credit applications in your name. Would you like me to show the officers those records as well?" Logan sat down hard, his legs seeming to give out beneath him. His hands were shaking visibly now. I hadn't known about any gambling problem. Neither had my parents, judging from the absolute shock on their faces. But Grandpa knew everything. He'd known for months, maybe years, and he'd waited until this exact moment to reveal it, when Logan's credibility was already destroyed, when there was nowhere left to hide and no way to spin the story. Just when I thought it was finally over, when I thought all the family secrets had been dragged into the light, Miles slid another folder forward, across the polished table. "Professional forgery analysis," he said quietly, opening it to reveal more documents. Inside were copies of papers I'd supposedly signed over the past year and a half. Transfer agreements for company assets, power of attorney forms granting my parents control, corporate resolutions changing board membership, authorization letters for major financial decisions. Every single document had been examined by a certified handwriting expert, complete with detailed analysis reports attached. Every single one was marked with the same devastating conclusion: forged. "Who actually signed these documents?" one officer asked, leaning in to read the expert's report. Miles pointed to a specific paragraph in the analysis. "Logan Whitmore. The handwriting, pen pressure, and signature characteristics match his known handwriting samples from school records and DMV documents. He signed his brother's name on 43 separate legal documents over the past 18 months. 43 times. My brother had stolen my identity, forged my signature, and committed fraud 43 separate times. And my parents had not only known about it, they'd helped him do it, encouraged it, planned it with him. I looked directly at Logan for the first time since this nightmare began. He wouldn't look back at me, couldn't meet my eyes. Why? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper but somehow carrying through the silent room. Why would you do this to me? He didn't answer. His mouth opened and closed uselessly, but I already knew the answer without hearing it. Because he could. Because they all thought I'd never find out. Because they saw me as weak, as someone who didn't matter, as someone whose life they could steal without consequences. Because to them, I had never mattered at all. My mother started crying harder now, loud gasping sobs that sounded almost performative, like she was crying for an audience rather than from genuine emotion. My father immediately started shifting blame to Logan. This was entirely your idea. You said it would be simple and clean. You promised nobody would ever know. Logan blamed pressure and expectations, his voice rising desperately. You don't understand what it's like. Everyone always expecting you to be perfect, to succeed at everything. The pressure was crushing me. They argued loudly, talking over each other. They blamed each other with increasing desperation. They pointed fingers and made accusations, but not a single one of them looked at me. Not one of them apologized. Not one of them said they were sorry for stealing from me, for lying to me for years, for making me believe I was worthless and would never amount to anything. I realized something absolutely chilling in that moment, sitting there watching them fall apart. They never once thought of apologizing. Even now, caught completely and cornered with nowhere to run, they still fundamentally believed they deserved what they'd taken. They still believed, deep down, that I was the real problem somehow. The officer with gray hair had apparently seen enough dysfunction for one night. Mr. Logan Whitmore, please stand up and step away from the table. Logan's face went pale again. Mr. and Mrs. Whitmore, you as well. Stand up, please. My mother made a sound like a wounded animal, high and desperate. My father tried to argue, his voice getting louder. Now wait just a minute here, officer. You can't just... Stand up, now. They stood on shaking legs, looking suddenly smaller and older. Grandpa cleared his throat, and the sound was soft, but somehow it cut through everything else in the room like a knife. I knew this dinner would hurt everyone, he said, looking around the table at each person. But lies rot in silence. They poison everything they touch, every relationship, every truth. I couldn't let that continue. He looked directly at me then, his eyes wet with tears he was too proud to let fall. I needed you clean, Caleb, he said, his voice cracking slightly. Completely untouched by this mess, by their crimes. So when the truth finally came out, you'd be the only one left standing. The only one they couldn't possibly blame or taint. For the first time in my entire life, I understood that someone had actually protected me. Not by giving me things or making life easier, but by keeping me poor and struggling and in the dark, by letting me suffer through minimum wage jobs and late rent payments. So I'd be innocent when this moment finally came. So I'd be free of their crimes. You watched me struggle, I said, not accusingly, but just stating fact. I did, he admitted. And that's the part that will haunt me until I die. But Caleb, if you'd known you were wealthy, if you'd acted like you had any power at all, they would have destroyed you completely. They would have found ways to make you look unstable or incompetent. Your mother was already researching how to have you declared mentally unfit. My blood ran cold at those words. So I had to keep you genuinely innocent, Grandpa continued. So no one could ever claim you were part of any of this. Thank you, I whispered, finally understanding the sacrifice he'd made. Thank you for protecting me the only way you could. He nodded once, a single tear finally escaping down his weathered cheek. The officers moved with practiced efficiency now, no longer hesitant or uncertain about what needed to happen. They asked my parents to stand away from the table, then Logan. Metal handcuffs clicked closed around wrists, the sound impossibly sharp and final in the quiet room. My mother cried louder, her sobs echoing. My father argued uselessly, his voice getting higher and more desperate with each word. Logan just stood there frozen like a statue, like he still couldn't process that this was actually happening to him, that consequences had finally arrived. You're being arrested for fraud, criminal forgery, identity theft, and grand larceny, the officer said formally, reading from a card. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. The words blurred together into legal noise. I watched them being led toward the front door like criminals in a movie. My mother looked back at me once, her eyes desperately pleading for something. Forgiveness, help, understanding. I looked away, unable to give her what she wanted. Logan stumbled on the threshold, and my father caught his arm to steady him in a moment of parental instinct that was far too late, and then they were gone. The door closed with a quiet click that sounded like the end of everything. Sirens started up outside, wailing into the night. The countdown clock on the wall still blinked red numbers. Time moving forward, whether we wanted it to or not. I sat alone at the table with my grandfather and Miles, listening to the police car drive away, carrying my family into a future they'd never imagined for themselves. And I realized I was shaking, my whole body trembling, like I'd been standing outside in the freezing cold for hours without a coat. Miles quietly poured me a glass of water. I drank it without really tasting it, my hands wrapped around the glass for something solid to hold on to. I genuinely thought the story was finished at that point. I thought that was it. The dramatic climax was over. The truth was finally out in the open. My family was gone, and now somehow I could start the long process of putting my shattered life back together. Then one officer turned back from the doorway, the one with kind eyes who'd been quieter than his partner. "There's more you need to know," he said gently. My stomach dropped sickeningly. What else could there possibly be? What other revelation could make this night worse? Miles looked at Grandpa with a question in his eyes. Grandpa nodded slowly, giving permission. "Show him everything," Grandpa said quietly. Miles reached into his briefcase one final time and pulled out a sealed envelope. The paper was old, expensive, cream-colored with a red wax seal that looked official and intimidating. "This is your grandfather's updated last will and testament," Miles explained carefully. "Properly witnessed by 3 attorneys, filed officially with the county, legally completely irrevocable under state law." I stared at the envelope like it might explode. "Open it, Caleb," Grandpa said softly. My hands shook badly as I broke the wax seal, feeling it crack under my thumb. Inside were legal documents printed on heavy paper, dense with words and phrases I barely understood even though they were in English. But some phrases jumped out at me like they were highlighted. Sole heir and beneficiary, complete ownership with no exceptions, permanent bar from any future claim or contest. I looked up at Grandpa, confused and overwhelmed. "What does all this actually mean?" Miles explained gently, like he was talking to someone in shock. "It means the company is entirely yours, completely and totally yours with no strings attached, and your parents and brother are permanently legally barred from any claim to it, even after they're released from prison, even if they try to contest the will, even if they hire lawyers and fight. The document is completely ironclad. They can never touch it." My father's voice suddenly cut through the closed door, muffled but audible. He was shouting from inside the police car, his words incoherent with rage. My mother screamed my name like she'd suddenly remembered I existed, like I mattered to her now. "Caleb, Caleb, please, you have to help us." Logan stared at me through the car window, his face pressed against the glass. His expression was twisted with something between pure hatred and complete disbelief. Like I had somehow betrayed him by existing. Like this entire disaster was my fault somehow. I didn't say a single word back to any of them. I didn't need to. There was nothing left to say. The patrol car finally pulled away from the curb, lights flashing red and blue across the walls. The sirens faded slowly into the distance, growing quieter and quieter until they disappeared completely. And the house fell into heavy silence. It smelled strange now, like cold food going bad and broken family traditions and the death of everything I'd thought I knew about my life. Grandpa exhaled deeply like he'd been physically holding his breath for years. Maybe he actually had been. "Are you all right?" he asked me, his voice rough with emotion. I didn't know how to answer that honestly. Was I all right? My entire family had just been arrested for crimes against me. My entire life up until this moment had been based on lies. Everything I'd believed about myself, about my worth, about my place in the world was completely wrong. "I honestly don't know," I said, which was the truest thing I'd said all night. He nodded with understanding. "That's a fair answer. That's honest." We sat in silence for a long time, neither of us knowing what to say next. Miles started carefully packing up his briefcase, moving slowly and deliberately like he was giving us space to process everything that had happened. "I should explain my actual role in all this," he said after a while. I looked at him properly for the first time, this stranger who had stood silent and still all night while my entire world collapsed and rebuilt itself. "I'm not here to take anything from you," he said clearly. "I want you to understand that completely. I'm here to hand everything back to you, properly and legally." He'd been Grandpa's safeguard all along, a ghost executive whose name appeared on all the legal documents but who never made a single actual business decision. When your grandfather first realized what your family was doing, he needed someone trustworthy on paper, Miles explained patiently. Someone who could hold the company legally while he quietly built his case against them. Someone who absolutely couldn't be bribed or threatened or convinced to look the other way. "Why you specifically?" I asked, genuinely curious. Miles smiled slightly. I'm a retired prosecutor with 30 years of experience. I've seen a lot of families destroy themselves over money and inheritance. Your grandfather wanted someone who wouldn't be impressed by threats or sob stories. He handed me a business card with his contact information. Starting Monday morning, you're officially in charge. Really in charge, not just on paper. I'll help you transition into the role, teach you what you need to know, introduce you to key people. But this company was always meant to be yours. That never changed. I took the card with trembling hands, reading his name printed in simple black letters. Miles Arden, attorney at law. After Miles finally left, gathering his briefcase and folders, I sat alone with my grandfather in the enormous, empty house. The silence felt heavy, like something physical pressing down. Why didn't you tell me sooner? I asked the question that had been burning in my mind. Why did you let me suffer for so long? Grandpa was quiet for a very long time, staring at his weathered hands folded on the table. Because if you had known the truth, he said finally, his voice tired, you would have changed. You would have acted differently around them, and they would have noticed immediately. I was miserable, I said quietly. I was so miserable I sometimes thought about just giving up completely. I know. His voice cracked with genuine pain, and that's the part I'll regret until the day I die, Caleb. But if you'd known you were wealthy, if you'd acted like you had any kind of power, they would have destroyed you. Really destroyed you in ways you can't even imagine. I stared at him, not fully understanding. They would have found ways to make you look unstable or incompetent, he continued. Your mother was already researching how to have you declared mentally unfit. She had consultations with 3 different doctors about getting you committed. I have copies of her emails. My blood turned to ice in my veins. So I had to keep you genuinely, completely innocent, Grandpa said, truly in the dark about everything. So when the truth finally came out, absolutely no one could claim you were part of it or benefiting from it. I sat there processing this terrible truth, that my suffering had been necessary, that my poverty had protected me. I understand, I finally whispered. The rest of New Year's night passed in surreal silence. Grandpa went to bed early, completely exhausted from the emotional confrontation and years of carrying these secrets. I sat alone in the formal living room with the sealed will still in my hands, reading it over and over. Whitmore Industrial Holdings, a manufacturing company my great-grandfather had started back in 1952, building parts for cars and airplanes, now worth millions of dollars. And it was mine. Actually, legally mine. I read through all the documents Miles had left for me, spread across the coffee table like pieces of a puzzle. Employee lists with hundreds of names, asset reports showing buildings and equipment, financial statements with numbers that made my head spin. It was all real. It was all solid and documented and true, and it was completely overwhelming in ways I couldn't even begin to explain. I'd spent so many years believing I was worthless, that I'd failed at life, that my family was right about me being incompetent. Now I had to somehow unlearn all of that poisonous thinking. I had to start believing I actually deserved this, that I was worth something, that I wasn't the failure they'd convinced me I was. That was going to be the hardest part of everything. Not running the company or managing money or making business decisions, but believing, truly believing deep in my heart that I was actually worth something. I fell asleep on the couch eventually, papers scattered around me like fallen leaves, and dreamed about loading trucks at dawn. Old habits die very hard. Monday morning arrived too quickly. I met Miles at the company headquarters downtown, a gleaming glass building I'd passed hundreds of times on the bus without ever knowing it was connected to my family. Security at the front desk recognized Miles immediately. They didn't recognize me at all. "This is Caleb Whitmore," Miles said clearly, "the owner and CEO. The guard's expression changed completely, his eyes widening. Oh, yes sir, welcome. We've been expecting you." We rode the elevator to the top floor where the executive offices were. My great-grandfather's portrait hung in the hallway, stern and serious in black and white. I looked like him, I realized with shock. Same eyes, same jawline, same serious expression. Miles showed me into the corner office, my office now. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the entire city spread out below. "Your grandfather kept everything running smoothly with good people," Miles said, gesturing around. "The management staff is excellent. They're professionals who will help you learn everything you need to know." "What if I'm not good at this?" I asked, the old fear rising up. "What if I fail?" Miles smiled warmly. "Your grandfather didn't give you this company because you're perfect or because you have a business degree. He gave it to you because you understand what it means to start from nothing and build something through hard work. That's worth more than any MBA. He was right, I realized. I didn't need to be Logan, the golden child who'd never actually earned anything. I just needed to be myself. And maybe, just maybe, that would be enough. I didn't fire anyone in those first months. Didn't make dramatic changes or announce I was cleaning house and starting fresh. I just watched carefully. Listened more than I spoke. Learned everything I could. I met with every department head individually, asking questions and taking notes. I reviewed budgets line by line. I studied production reports and safety records. I walked the factory floor and talked to workers about their actual jobs. People were surprised by how much time I spent in meetings, how many questions I asked, how seriously I took even small details. But I'd worked loading trucks in freezing warehouses. I'd stocked shelves until my back ached. I understood how the bottom rung of business actually worked. I knew when people were lying about efficiency or cutting corners on safety to save money. Within 3 months, I'd reorganized 2 struggling departments. I found cost savings without cutting jobs. I improved safety protocols that had been ignored for years. The company stabilized, then actually started growing. People stopped watching me nervously, waiting for me to fail spectacularly. They started coming to me with ideas and suggestions, treating me like I actually knew what I was doing. The board members stopped treating me like a temporary placeholder. They started treating me like a real leader. Because I was one, I realized with shock. I'd just never known it before because nobody had ever given me the chance to find out. My family sent letters from prison. I was told by my lawyer that they existed sitting in a box in his office. I never opened a single one. My mother's lawyer contacted me formally about visiting rights. I said no through my attorney. Logan tried calling from the prison phone system multiple times. I blocked the number permanently. My father wrote a long email somehow about how I'd torn the entire family apart and destroyed everything. I deleted it without reading past the first line. I felt absolutely no guilt about any of it. They'd had every possible chance to treat me with basic human decency. They'd chosen cruelty instead, repeatedly, for years. They'd stolen from me systematically. They'd lied to my face. They'd made me believe I was worthless and would never amount to anything. And even when they were caught completely, they still never apologized sincerely. You don't owe forgiveness to people who aren't actually sorry. You don't owe relationship to people who only want you when you have something they need from you. I built new relationships, instead, with people who saw my real value, who respected my work ethic, who didn't need me to fail so they could feel successful. My grandfather was absolutely right about everything. Sometimes the very best revenge is simply living well. The next New Year's Eve, I ate dinner alone in my apartment, the same small studio with peeling paint and the broken radiator. I could have moved easily. I could afford any house in the city now, any neighborhood I wanted. But I stayed in that tiny apartment deliberately. I needed to remember where I came from, what I'd survived, who I used to believe I was. I made simple food, nothing fancy or expensive, and at exactly midnight, I poured myself a single glass of cheap champagne. I raised it to the empty room in a silent toast. To knowing your worth, I said quietly to myself, and to letting the truth do what anger never could. The champagne was cheap, probably terrible. The apartment was small and cold, but I was completely free. Really, truly free. Not because I had money now, not because my family was gone and couldn't hurt me anymore, but because I finally knew the truth about myself. I wasn't the failure they'd said I was. I never had been. I was just surrounded by people who needed me to be small so they could feel big. And now they were gone from my life. The clock struck midnight with soft chimes. Somewhere in the city outside, fireworks exploded in celebration. I smiled to myself in the darkness. And finally, for the first time in years, I felt like I could actually breathe.